Hello, and welcome to episode 35 of the Women in Manufacturing Association's Hear Her Story podcast. My name is Allison Graylis, president and founder of the Women in Manufacturing Association. March is a special month for us at Women in Manufacturing. During this month, we acknowledge the incredible contributions women in manufacturing have made throughout history. These women have played a critical role in redefining the industry, driving innovation, and encouraging greater diversity in the workplace. In this episode, I talk with Rachel Cooke, Global Director, Reliability Maintenance Engineering at Amazon, about the latest trends in cultivating gender inclusion in the workplace. Rachel also shares her insights into how corporate initiatives can inspire inclusion and enhance workplace culture. We are happy you can join us for this empowering episode as we celebrate International Women's Day and Women's History Month. Enjoy this episode. Well, Rachel, welcome to Hear Her Story. I'm so excited to have this conversation with you and to learn more about your journey in manufacturing and your career. Often, as we talk to guests who are in industry and part of our discussions on Hear Her Story, we'd like to learn a little bit about yourself and your background and your journey in your manufacturing career. So can you share a little bit about yourself, where you grew up, kind of what were some of those early influences and interests, and how did you first start your journey in manufacturing?
Sure. So thank you very much for having me on this podcast. I'm British, so I actually grew up in the northeast of England, which is quite an industrial area. And I think that was really my early influences were down to my father, who had a job as a chemical engineer in the northeast of England. So he was very influential, I think, in that I saw him as a role model, having a job that was not only intellectually challenging, but that he enjoyed and that he got to travel and see the world. So I'm an only child. I grew up, as I said, mainly in the northeast of England, but I did have 2 years living in the Netherlands as a child between the ages of 8 to 10. And then I went to Cambridge to study chemical engineering. So I did a master's or a double master's as they are, Master of Arts, Master of Engineering. And then I was enjoying myself so much at university, I stayed and did a PhD. So I did a PhD sponsored by Schlumberger, so actually oil field services in fracking. But when that all came to the end, I ended up joining a manufacturing graduate scheme for a company called Cadbury, who make chocolate. And the reason I did that was because I love chocolate. And they had a really good graduate scheme where you spent like the first 3 years of your career rotating between different jobs. So I joined Cadbury in the southwest of England and worked there for a year. Then through some influencing and asking, I got to move abroad and I worked in Dublin in Ireland for a year. And then I came back to the UK and did a new product development type role. But I was a manufacturing graduate. I spent time as a shift leader in manufacturing. I was always working with chocolate and sweet production. And then Cadbury announced their biggest investment project, which was to build a new chewing gum factory in Poland. And following the advice of my mentor, I volunteered to work on that project. And I moved to Poland for 3 years. I learned Polish and built a new chewing gum factory and then built a new chocolate factory next door and did a variety of different roles in the construction and commissioning and launch of a new factory. Following that experience, I really wanted to live in London. Being from the northeast of England, I didn't really know London very well. And so I took a job still with Cadbury, but at the interface between marketing and supply chain. So using my manufacturing knowledge and sharing it with marketeers as to which new sweets we develop. And I did that for a couple of years until I got contacted on LinkedIn by a company called SAB Miller, South African Breweries Miller. And they proposed a fantastic job doing worldwide or global operational excellence. So I moved to join them, entered the whole world of beer and brewing. And that was when I went to America for the first time, went to Africa for the first time, went to Latin, South America for the first time, went to Australia, and I learned an awful lot about world-class manufacturing principles and practice. Unfortunately, they were taken over by another company. And at that time, Amazon came knocking and they proposed to me a role in their program management office, which I took and relocated to Luxembourg for. After a few months, the role evolved into more of a central engineering services type role, managing capital planning and change management and analytics. And then after 3 years doing that, I joined the reliability and maintenance engineering organization in a central role again and grew in scope, running it for the whole of Europe. And now for the past year, I've been leading globally for that organization, but still based in Luxembourg.
That's a huge amount of experience that you have, Rachel, and so impressive. I mean, holy cow, the number of countries you've lived in has got to be a pretty long and large list. You mentioned your mentor or a mentor who first encouraged you to take that role in Poland. It sounds like that may have changed a lot of your trajectory professionally, taking that first expat role or that first role in Poland to then leading to many other opportunities that you took and jumped at in other countries and other new assignments. How have you encouraged people professionally, knowing how influential that was in your first role? How do you kind of influence others as you mentor people who are thinking about or aren't even thinking about new opportunities?
I think the first thing I do is I encourage people to get a mentor. Right? Everyone's definition of what a successful career looks like is different. But because I had that experience between the ages of 8 to 10, living in a different country, I knew it was something I really wanted to do. And then for me, it was about how to make that happen. And that was what I was discussing with my mentor. And then that's how I ended up in Ireland, which is a different country to the UK, but it's not as big a jump as it was going to Poland. So I knew I wanted that expat experience, and I discussed with my mentor how I could make that happen. And I was really just looking for opportunities. But when I mentor people, I mean, this is a piece of advice: is there's no harm in sending someone an email. Like the worst they can do is delete it and not respond. But if you think about now in the position I'm in, I'm always looking for talented people who want to come and grow and develop themselves and work for me. So if somebody presents themselves and puts their hand up and says, I'd really like to move to a different country and support you on this project, then, it was great that it was positively received, but also they were looking for people who were prepared to go and live in Poland. So it was a win-win situation.
Excellent. I think great advice for people who, are either looking for a mentor or have a mentor, how to help them be a great ally as you're trying to navigate your career professionally, I think is really important. You also mentioned, so you started educationally in engineering. How did you end up in engineering? Was that just something that you had certain skill sets or interests that matched with an engineering program?
The time when I applied for my engineering degree, I obviously said, I'm very good at maths, physics, chemistry, and that's why I want to be a chemical engineer. But looking back, I mean, the most significant role model was my father, and he was an engineer. And I think that's the environment I grew up in, with construction, toys, making things. And that was kind of what I saw I wanted to do as a career. I got taken on open days of chemical plants and stuff. So from an early age, I was kind of in that kind of environment. And that was, to me, embedded as to what a career could look like.
So you've had an illustrious manufacturing career present day, working with lots of teams, lots of different facilities in many different roles. As you look at the future, what are those aspirations that you have in your manufacturing career that you haven't yet checked off? Are there certain things that you aspire to achieve or places to go as you look at the next leg or future legs of your manufacturing career?
When I was at Cadbury, we were working on the chocolate factory of the future and the packaging line of the future. When I was at SAB Miller, we were working on the brewery of the future and the packaging line of the future. And now at Amazon. I'm still trying to make the future come to life. So very much all the different aspects of Industry 4.0, artificial intelligence, Internet of Things, and all the digitization and digital work tools that come together, including things like wearable tech. So I'm still on that journey. I've certainly managed to get more of it delivered and more of it working here at Amazon, but there's still a long way to go before we can fully realize all the potential of the technology development. So that is still something that's motivating me to make all these things that I've been writing about for years and trialing for years actually widespread. In terms of countries to visit, I do actually have a little list, but obviously it's dictated by work, and I shouldn't be just doing industrial tourism. But like my next trip is to New York, which is work, and I've never been to New York, so I'm quite excited about that. After New York, I'm going to Germany, but that's just a day trip from Luxembourg. So it's 30 minutes and you're in Germany, so that's not so big. Going to Washington, D.C. And then I'm going to Japan for 2 weeks to Tokyo and probably some other cities as well. And then I've got Nashville planned as well. So yeah, there's quite an intensive travel schedule within a global role. And the important thing for me is really to try and make sure I have some time at home.
It's important stuff. You'll someday, Rachel, have to share your best practices of travel. But as much as you're doing for other women in manufacturing who maybe are newer to international travel and business travel, we'll have to kind of get some of your best practices, maybe even do a little blog here
Yeah.
or there in the future that could kind of your best tips for how to be efficient and how to pack and all those good things while visiting other countries and facilities could be a good thing.
Yeah, and actually you've just prompted me to say something else that I try and do when I travel, which is I do also try and do inclusion events or meet other female leaders and get other female leaders together when I go and visit. So last time I was in Japan, we had a round table of all the Japanese female leaders in operations, and we all talked about with translation software the different struggles that we faced. And I think what was interesting for me was a lot of them were very similar to those that we face in Europe, and talking to people in the US, it's kind of similar, the experiences that we go through. But I do try and travel and use that as a catalyst to bring other women together to share and to network.
That's great. And speaking, of inclusion, this year's theme for International Women's Day is Inspire Inclusion. So personally, when you think about the word inclusion and this theme of this year's International Women's Day of inspiring inclusion, what does that mean to you? And why is this important to women in manufacturing careers?
So to me, inclusion is all about valuing all individuals and giving equal access and opportunity to all, removing discrimination and other barriers that we experience to involvement. And I think the more that we do this, or the more that I do this, the richer my life becomes. The more you listen and learn to other individuals, have more productive and interesting conversations, and create an environment with a sense of belonging and empowerment. I think it brings out the best in everyone, and it makes every day better and more fun to come to work and be in. And manufacturing brings together like a huge diverse population of people with different skills, different backgrounds, different perspectives, as well as different genders, as we're talking about now. And one of the things about manufacturing is you're always working in a team, whether it's a shift team or a leadership team. And when you're new or just different, it can be really hard to feel included. But as a leader, like it's my responsibility not only to be inclusive of all my direct reports, my immediate team, but also to ensure that they're being inclusive as well.
Very important. And I loved as you were sharing, your practice that you've just done informally of meeting with the female groups and employees and leaders at facilities as you travel the globe. It's so important for, I'm sure, them to feel heard and for them to feel like they've got an ally and advocate in you as you are making connections and speaking up at meetings and representing their interests. So I think inclusion is so important. We talk about recruiting so often, let's recruit more women into manufacturing and more diverse populations, but the inclusion piece is critical. Otherwise, folks are not going to stay in manufacturing. They're not going to stay at your companies if they don't feel as though they truly are heard, represented, and included in that organization's culture and entity. So you mentioned, you're currently at Amazon and you have a great role that allows you the opportunity to work with lots of individuals at many facilities across the globe. Amazon's been a great partner with WIN over the last few years as we have worked to grow our network of members and companies and to reach more women in industry. Can you share a little bit about some of the corporate initiatives that Amazon has in place to inspire inclusion in the workplace?
Surely, a company the size of Amazon, we have so many initiatives in place. So for me, like the most important thing is the leadership commitment and the action. So it's necessary for all of our leaders to state that they support inclusion, but they also need to take some action related to that. So not only in things like spending money and supporting organizations such as WIM, but also devoting time to inclusion and the inclusion of their teams and their reports. So we have a lot of training available. I guess that's the most obvious corporate initiative. Some of it's available on a self-serve, some of it is mandated. And I find the training really helpful in that it gives us a common language. And that's kind of why I find useful reading books and so on, because it gives me the vocabulary to talk about inclusion or discrimination or bias. But we also have some simulation training that allows us to reflect on our responses to situations through a inclusive lens deliberately, and then experience the result. So I think simulation training is kind of cool. We also have a manager-led team inclusion program where you take your team through some basic training, some terminology around biases and inclusion, and then we work through different scenarios and then come together with an action plan. And that for me is like the important bit, is the actual action behind it. We have other things such as recognizing inclusive leaders and giving them awards and letting them share their stories. And then there's another thing we do, which I've been at Amazon for 7 years now. And so I've kind of come to think of it as normal, but I need to remember that it isn't. And that's something called connections. So every day, everyone in Amazon is asked a question. And it can be about safety, it can be about inclusion, their manager, the team, Amazon as a company. There's a variety of questions that cycle through the year. And it gives me as a leader an aggregated score as to how I'm doing in leading in an inclusive way. So there's various questions about inclusion, and they add them all up and they say, as your inclusion score is this. And then I can see how my team have responded anonymously and we can take action. But I can also see how inclusive all the leaders that report to me are as well. So we have a number of different mechanisms. Those are just a few of the things that we do to inspire inclusion.
So that survey that you folks are doing, is that something that is, I guess, an electronic survey that goes to people? And you said, is it on a daily basis or?
Yeah, every day. So every day, if you log on to your terminal or your laptop, the question pops up.
That is really cool. And then you get to see kind of how are you performing, as you said, but as well, how is your team performing and those leaders that report to you? That's really important. And then I know I had the great pleasure of being able to participate in one of your celebratory events. You mentioned celebrating inclusive leaders, and I was part of your Win event in Barcelona that was really impressive, where you celebrated female leaders who were, I think, from not obviously just from Barcelona, but from lots of different places, to celebrate what they were doing as leaders to be more inclusive, which was really impressive. I think it's a great model that maybe other companies can follow, which again helps celebrate, help to inspire and inform people about the great work that was being done. I know you were one of the celebrated people, so congrats again.
Thanks. But yeah, actually, our last leader was a male. So when you ask who's the most inclusive leader, you can get that. And then you can have this really interesting conversation and celebrate their success, give them a little certificate, and understand what drives them to be inclusive, and then what tips and advice they've got so that we can all continue to improve.
So we know that there's been increased awareness over this past decade around the importance of diverse teams, the importance of diverse leaders and employees, and a culture of inclusivity. But not all companies have had success or have done this seamlessly as we've tried to be more inclusive companies and fostered these types of environments. What do you think are some of the biggest barriers that companies face when they're trying to create an atmosphere of gender inclusion?
I think there's probably two main barriers. One is understanding, and then the second is ownership. So understanding the importance of inclusion, because maybe it's possible, but unless you have direct experience, I think it can be hard to understand the impact of not having an inclusive environment. And, a lot of men come to inclusion, diversity, feminism when they have daughters. It's true. I've asked, right? And that's the truth. So it's like for them to have an understanding and to care about it. So I think it needs to be higher up on the priority list. And one of the reasons it's not is because it's actually kind of hard. It's not like one big action that you can do. It's really, I think, the accumulative effect of lots of smaller actions. And it can be hard for leaders to identify those and then prioritize that. And that's really about the ownership point. At Amazon, we're really fortunate. We have a diversity, equity, and inclusion team full of experts that guide us through what we can do and create training for us. But like, we're all in manufacturing, so we know that we all own safety, and it's the same with inclusion. We need to own inclusion of our teams and not wait for someone else to do it for us. And I see a lot of male leaders who leave gender diversity and inclusion initiatives to the women on their team to lead, when actually they really need to own it and do it themselves and devote time to it to make it successful. So I think those are probably the biggest two barriers I can see.
I think those are really good pieces of advice. And so I think we have seen a lot of companies that leaders have difficulty if they themselves haven't experienced discrimination or they haven't experienced bias. It's difficult for them to understand the plight of their female workforce. And so, I know diversity training is really important. It's something that WIM is actually going to be tackling this coming year is kind of better working with allies in manufacturing to help them understand the challenges that some of their female workforce faces through case studies and through sharing, because we know men still make up the majority of leadership positions, the majority of managerial positions. And we need to have those folks on board as well as we're trying to increase numbers of women in industry and advance women at a larger rate in manufacturing companies.
I mean, yeah, I've looked at this and I've come to the conclusion that there's only so far women can get helping each other, and that
Right.
for us actually to get this inclusive environment, men need to lead and own it because they are in the majority and they are in the positions of power. And so if we are going to change this culture, they need to be with us every step of the way, if not slightly ahead.
So very true. And we again, as an organization, that is one of our key goals is we want, yes, women to have camaraderie in a community, but you need men as allies along the way to really make change, to increase that number from 30 to 50% of women in manufacturing, and more importantly, to have more women leaders in manufacturing. We need them on board too. So obviously the effort happening in many companies. As you look at ways that we can promote an inclusive workforce, what are some steps that other people, so maybe listeners to today's discussion, what are some actions that others can take in their own pockets of ownership within their company to create and promote an inclusive workforce?
So I think I've reflected on what you can do to create inclusion because I'm trying to create a more inclusive workplace myself. And I think there's probably three things to do. One is to learn, because as I said, learning gives you the vocabulary to talk about what you're seeing, what you're experiencing. And I think that makes it easier to discuss once you can articulate it with the right words. There's the courses you can do, the electronic online learning, there's reading non-fiction books about it. But I also find that reading fiction is a great way to learn about people different to me. I read fiction, written that involve, Black people, and that is a way that I can learn about what they experience without directly asking them. The next thing I would say, the second step, is to listen. It's not my responsibility to educate everyone I meet about gender discrimination, sexism, and feminism and everything. But if people come and ask thoughtful questions with good intentions, then I'm happy to share. And I find other people are too. And now that I have this larger organization, and also as I travel, I find going several layers deep into it, I can find people who've had experiences that I can actually act on and help. Because I think learning is great. Listening to other people is really important. But unless you actually have concrete actions, then nothing is really going to change. So then it's about acting, whether it's about speaking at an event, sponsoring an organization, or doing specific things with your team, such as, we do stuff about learning styles questionnaires. We have a lovely system of giving everyone positive feedback about all the good things they are, having discussions about the topic, taking interventions when you see things that aren't inclusive, celebrating things that are inclusive, deliberately stopping to schedule things around dinner and alcohol, but starting to schedule things during the day. All these things are things you can do to be more inclusive and make sure you're not waiting for someone else to improve the culture of your team, because that's not going to happen. It's really up for us to own that.
Great advice. I like it. So learn, listen, and take action.
Yeah.
Because I think too often, to your point, we hear leaders saying, well, I'm doing these town halls or these focus groups with employees and with my reports, but it's that action piece that's critical. You can't just listen and be educated on what needs to happen. You need to take that next step to really implement change and to take action on things that you're hearing about. I've been inspired by many women over the course of my career, and I'm sure you have as well. Are there certain people that have inspired you in your career and your journey? And in what way have these people inspired you?
So I think I admire any woman who has the courage to try and address inequality and create an easier life and path for those who are going to come after them. I've been inspired by many women, from like my first female manager, female directors, female mentors. They all play a great role in showing you what's possible and in role modeling the fact that women can be be leaders, vice presidents, directors in manufacturing organizations. There's a couple that really resonate that I want to share with the audience. The one is to look at Laura Bates, maybe start with her TED Talk. She founded the Everyday Sexism Project. I think it was really useful for me. Again, it gave me a whole load of vocabulary to describe what I experienced. And I've just finished a book by Jill Whitty Collins called Why Men Win at Work. And I think that is also, it's a great book. I had to buy a highlighter because I just agreed with everything. It's very quotable. But it's really about if you're not in the dominant group, then it's very hard to be your authentic self at work. And if you're not your authentic self, you don't come across as confident. A lot of the stuff and advice in that book, Why Men Win at Work, was really resonated to me. I wish it had been written earlier. So those are probably a couple of the things, but really any woman that has tried to make a difference in the world is someone that I admire and am inspired by.
That's great. I'll have to check out Why Men Win at Work. And then you said Laura Bates and her TED Talk on inequality.
Yeah, I think it's called Everyday Sexism is her most famous one. But she's written, the Everyday Sexism Project. It's very UK, so maybe not quite big in America, but she's done some really great work in the UK around sexism in schools and in work.
We'll have to check those out. So we often like to have our guests on here, her story, share your best piece of advice that you have received from a colleague or mentor or leader and share it with our audience. So is there one piece of advice that sticks out that has been influential in your career?
So I've reflected because I know you gave me this question in advance and I thought about it and I realized that the best career advice changes as your career progresses and recognizing this audience might be at different stages. I've got a few. So starting out in my career, the best piece of advice I received was to volunteer, to lead and help with extracurricular activities, that getting good grades at university wasn't enough to get you a job. So throughout my entire career, I've done much voluntary work, whether it's to do with DEI as it is now, but I used to do a lot of work on STEM, science and engineering outreach. I still do a lot of work with my professional institution as well. And that gives me a whole lot of extra skills and extra mentors and extra friends. So that would be my first piece of advice, but it's really for when you're starting out, because when you get to a little bit more senior, then you can't do everything. And then I remember, we talked a little bit about how I got to do my expat assignments. And I remember being told no one cares about your career as much as you do. And I think that's kind of resonated with me. So it's about the advice I got from my mentors was about having the courage to ask about opportunities. I think if you don't ask, you'll never know. And if the answer's no, then you're no worse off than you were, but maybe something will come differently. And then as I've got older, I've started to realize that success is defined differently by everyone. So figure out what your definition of success looks like. What career do you want? How and where do you want to work? What type of work do you want to do? When I started out in manufacturing, it was in food, right? So I had to wear white every day. Couldn't wear nail varnish. I couldn't wear perfume. My hair had to be in a hairnet. And whilst, on reflection, I was happy to do that for a few years, it certainly wasn't something I wanted to do for a 40-year career. So that was a reflection. Something I've been discussing even today is that you do best what you're good at. As I took through my career journey, I migrated away from doing engineering and technical manufacturing roles. And I wasn't as good as those as I am at doing more engineering, manufacturing, technical roles. So that was an important lesson. And then now I think the advice I'd like to give to myself is to be really deliberate about where I spend my time and energy. So to focus on things that are important to me and where I can make the most difference.
That's great advice. And I love how you segmented it into kind of our career milestones, because I do think that advice changes early career, mid-career. As I like to say, Rachel, my mature stage of career that I am now, it's crazy how time flies. And I'm in a similar spot to you of just trying to be more deliberate about those decisions that I make about where I spend my time, where I'm lending expertise, and where I'm kind of allocating that time, talent, and treasure, because time is limited. And as you look at kind of how quickly the last, at least for me professionally, 20 some years have gone, that next 20 is going to fly by pretty quick as well, I'm assuming. So I think great advice, both on the front of kind of how we all as a group and collective can support and more inclusive workplace, as well how we can navigate those different parts of our career. And again, you've had such an impressive journey. And I know it was such a pleasure when I got to meet you in Barcelona. And it's amazing the impact I'm sure you're having at all the facilities that you get to have contact with. So again, thanks for being part of Hear Her Story and for having this conversation with us and sharing your insights and expertise. And we love that you're part of our WIN community. And again, congrats on all the great work that you're doing. And of course, we wish you nothing but lots of success for the future.
No, thank you so much, Alison. And thank you for everything you do for women in manufacturing and for giving me the opportunity to share my story.
Thank you for listening to Hear Her Story, a podcast produced by the Women in Manufacturing Association. Be sure to share, review, and subscribe to Hear Her Story on Apple, Google, Spotify, or wherever you like to listen.